Hello everyone, and welcome to Mr. Simplify's tutorials. This tutorial we're going to look at Max Weber's bureaucratic management. We're going to simplify it, and we're going to look at tips to remember it or memorize it. So, at this point of time, the Cambridge Dictionary defines bureaucracy as a system for controlling or managing a country, company, or an organization, and this is achieved by employing a large number of officials who follow a number of rules carefully. Many modern business leaders think of bureaucracy as a mechanism that actually crushes creativity and stops people from growing in organizations. They try to eliminate or at least reduce bureaucracy. But there are others who think of it as a necessary evil. The general perception, however, on bureaucracy or red tape is negative. Max Weber, however, believed that rationalization of the society and of organizations is inevitable. This means making a society more efficient by combining certain roles, activities, or functions, or by removing unnecessary ones. And he saw bureaucracy as a means of making organizations more efficient. He strongly believed in bureaucracy to be so efficient and logical that it would transform the world. He came up with some characteristics of an ideal bureaucracy and believed that following these will be extremely beneficial for employees, for employers, and for the economy. These characteristics are also called the principles of Weber's bureaucratic management theory. Now let's look at these characteristics, and also let's look at a way to remember or memorize them. Now the characteristics are task specialization, hierarchy of authority, impersonal, formal selection process, formal rules and regulations, and career orientation. Okay, so these are the actual characteristics that an ideal bureaucracy will carry, and we're going to look at each one in detail now. But in terms of remembering these characteristics for your exams or just remembering it in general, what I did is I specifically took the first character from each characteristic to form THISFC. So T from task specialization, H from hierarchy of authority, I from impersonal, and so on. And what this forms is THISFC, which is this FC, which is football club. So this football club can be one of the ways of actually remembering all of these characteristics if you're preparing for an exam. Okay, now let's look at the first characteristic, task specialization. Now this implies that work be broken down into specialized tasks and that those be allocated to specialist individuals best suited to manage them. Now every employee here is responsible for the tasks handed to him or her and knows what the expected outcomes are. This ensures that everybody is clear about what their responsibilities are and knows their place and their powers in the organization. Now, going beyond their responsibilities is actually not allowed in a bureaucracy. For instance, the payroll department is responsible for managing staff salaries, and the IT department is responsible for managing the IT infrastructure in the organization. In a bureaucracy, an IT personnel will never be expected to pay salaries for members within their own teams, and this will actually always be done by the payroll department as a rule. Okay, now the next characteristic is hierarchy of authority. Now this can also be called hierarchy of management. So authority is another way of referring to the management in an organization. This implies that management in a bureaucracy is spread across a hierarchy. There will be employees, there will be people who manage these employees, and then there will be people who manage these managers. and so on. Essentially, mid-level managers will have people to manage and will report to their higher managers. So this ensures that there is easier management of tasks and that each manager can be held responsible for the performance of the people who report to him, and so on. So you understand, it's sort of like a hierarchical structure. For example, in a large company manufacturing chocolates, a marketing or a brand manager for a specific brand will have marketing and design executives working for him or her, and there will be a head of marketing managing a number of chocolate brands, and this marketing manager will actually report to that head of marketing on the performance of his or her brand. So there are a couple of layers that we can see here already. Okay, now the next characteristic is impersonal. Now this means that clear rules and regulations ensure that the relationships between employees remain professional, or in other words, impersonal, not personal. So employees should only relate to one another as required by the governing rules of the organization. Now this will firstly ensure that there is no favoritism or nepotism. This will also ensure that people's views and statements don't get influenced by who they're dealing with, because their relationship with other people is quite impersonal. So you wouldn't actually be kinder to an employee in a meeting, despite the employee not doing his or her job right, just because you have a personal relationship with that person. So employees in a bureaucracy are also discouraged from making their relationships personal. And if some employees do enter into personal relationships with other employees, the norm would be to try and reorganize them by sending them to different departments within the organization. Formal selection process. Now this can also be referred to as the assessment and selection of employees only based on their competence and suitability. Okay, so employees will be assessed or selected in the first place based only on their competence and suitability. This ensures that everyone be given a fair chance of securing employment and of growing in the organization, and that the skills, experience, and performance of people be the criteria used to select candidates and also to promote existing employees. In terms of an employee's contract, these are dictated by the organization, and there will be no bias depending on who a person knows in the organization. For example, a senior employee should not be able to hire his or her nephew or niece, for instance, unless they are actually suitable for the job and go through the same selection process that anyone else would. The next characteristic is formal rules and regulations. Now, ensuring the existence of formal rules and regulations ensures clarity and predictability. Now, human beings actually like predictability. It can also ensure that things are well coordinated and that there are very few surprises in actual outcomes of people. Ensuring that there are strict do's and don'ts ensures that there is no favoritism or human intervention to actually alter the output of any effort. Again, no surprises. It's all guided by rules and regulations. For example, if a monthly report schedule has been agreed for a particular project, weekly reports will not be required to be produced, and if a manager comes up with a weekly report, he or she will be advised that the agreed reporting schedule is monthly, and any changes to rules or addition of new rules will require the intervention of the senior management. The next characteristic is career orientation. Now, this can also be termed as a promise of a fair career assessment and progression. So employees who actually abide by the rules and consistently perform well in a bureaucracy will be given opportunities to progress in their careers. They will never be fired without reason and will be given the opportunity of a long-term career with stability and growth. Okay, so it's quite interesting. It also does provide people with that promise of a stable career. Okay, now these are all the characteristics. Now, does bureaucracy have advantages? Now, bureaucracy was widely accepted in the 1900s, and this was because it did actually carry some advantages. Here are some of them. Specialization. Now, people became specialists in their area of expertise. People were hired and trained only in the area of their expertise, and this led to them gaining more recognition and becoming better experts at whatever their fields were. Equality. Now, bureaucracy promoted equality in the organization, or at least it was supposed to. The management in ideal bureaucracies treated everyone equally. The policies were applicable to one and all. Learning from experience. Now, systematically recording all transactions and interactions meant that people could look at what was done in every situation in the past and then learn from that experience if the same situation happened again. This obviously resulted in reduction of errors and an increase in productivity. But despite the advantages, bureaucracy was considered as a flawed system because it had various shortcomings. Now, one of the shortcomings was the lack of innovation. Now, people were restricted to only carry out what was asked of them by senior management. This ultimately meant that innovation and out-of-the-box thinking was actually discouraged. This ultimately resulted in companies not getting efficient over time and also carrying on doing things the same way they always did. Exploitation of power. Now, this is quite important. The top-level management in a bureaucracy had all the power in terms of managing rules and regulations. It was therefore possible for management to actually misuse this power. In an ideal bureaucracy, they shouldn't, but in real life, it tended to happen. Dehumanization, extremely important. Now, people in bureaucracies were actually made to feel like cogs in a well-oiled machine. The flow of communication was always from the top to the bottom, and feedback from the bottom was never allowed. Now, this obviously would lead to dehumanization of employees, and in the long run, it would lead to dissatisfied staff, and could lead to revolts. Okay, now, in conclusion then, it is clear that on one hand, bureaucracy promotes fair selection, a defined structure, and impersonal decision-making, and on the other hand, it also promoted a mechanism for people at the top to actually control those at the bottom, and actually to the extent that it dehumanizes them. So what is your opinion on bureaucracy? What has your experience been? Do you think the disadvantages of bureaucracy outweigh the advantages? Where have you seen bureaucracy quite prominently, and what have you learned from your experience with bureaucracy? Do let me know in the comment section. Okay, so that was us taking a look at the characteristics of a bureaucracy. And I, as always, thank you very much for your attendance, and I hope that was useful for you. And if you're new here, I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel, to like this tutorial and other tutorials here relating to business and management, and take good care of yourself. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.